Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Michael and Patty Show, coming to you live, recorded, of course, from the Charlottetown waterfront, looking directly out on the Charlottetown Yacht Club. And today we have a petroleum ship, an oil ship from Irving, and the Canadian Coast Guard in port. It's a beautiful day, just recovering from a flu here. And ironically enough, my co-host is suffering from a flu now, and we have no idea where she contracted it from. Hi, Patty.
Hi, Michael. You probably got it from being in your recording studio last week with you hacking. So unfortunately, yes, I'm a little under the weather today.
That's highly unlikely, and you're looking amazing. I'm sure you'll do a good job. We're going to get right into the stats for December 2025. And again, the numbers are always thin when it comes to PEI real estate. According to this, home sales are up 20.5%. Boy, that sounds amazing. Until you look at it, it's 141 units versus 117 in the previous December 24. Market continues to be balanced, so it's neither in favor of the buyer or the seller. In our case, it's slightly in favor of the seller, but don't let it go to your head. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Meaning that overpricing your house by 100 to 200,000 is probably not going to help. And as we drove here to our production site, there's a lot of open houses going on, and I can guarantee you 99% of those are overpriced listings.
Yeah, or sellers that are putting a little bit of pressure on their agents asking, why hasn't it sold? And feel perhaps if you do some open houses, that might generate a buyer versus me reducing the price.
If anything, it's going to introduce the agent to the local home buyers and sellers, but sell the house? Probably not. New listings are up by 13.7%, 133 new listings versus 117 last December 24. And again, I think just going by memory, I think this was the same in November, the benchmark price, which is supposed to be your atypical residential house based on HPI, is $373,300, which is still quite affordable. One of our last episodes, Patty and I looked at a couple houses in the country, 15 minutes from town, Charlottetown, for $200,000 to $260,000. Your average house in PEI is now $370,300. Moving along, another bulletin was sent out to officiate what we were saying about the phishing. Phishing as in fraud, people looking to do Zoom calls, Google Meets, have you click on links, having my credit card frauded over 172 times there within the last 30 to 60 days. I know this stuff is happening. So the Canadian Real Estate Association has sent out a bulletin basically saying be very, very careful when you're responding to leads from realtor.ca. And why I'm bringing this up, if you are inquiring on a piece of property that's on realtor.ca, which is the best source and probably the only 100% accurate source in Canada for real estate, make sure that your email is a little more detailed than the typical please send me information, which is almost guaranteed just to be deleted. Patty?
Yeah. Oh, and to follow the next step with that, don't assume your email is reaching the agent either. I would be following it up with a phone call and just saying, I've sent you an email. I'm looking for some information. That way the agents know there's a little bit of validity in the email coming through because we are being inundated with a lot of these phishing emails.
Absolutely. So we're getting into topic number 3 here, writing a bad offer and setting a bad tone with the vendor. Recently, I had a situation where we have a purchaser going back with a vendor here. It's going on 2 or 3 months. And every offer they seem to write is just not something that's desirable to the sellers. And finally, we wrote the purchaser a letter explaining, like, we're not really happy how this is going, and we're not really interested in dealing with you moving forward, and here's the reasons why. So the purchaser came back and basically said that he had seen houses in PEI selling for 12 to 15% discounts on $1 million and change, so he felt that was normal, and that's what he was doing. And then in addition to that, he was asking for an endless list of inclusions that were far beyond the usual scope of a house, which included ride-on lawnmowers and whatever the case may be, his firstborn. So what happened in this particular situation is because there is absolutely no communication whatsoever between the purchaser's agent and the listing agent just to see what the paradigm or the situation may have been and how they can approach this in a collaborative way to buy this house. They just kept firing offers in and just put the vendor in a position now they just don't want to talk to this purchaser at all. So it's no longer even about money. It's just a personality conflict. So what I'm suggesting is if you're buying a house, don't just set yourself up in such a way that you think you're Mr. or Mrs. Leverage and you know what you're doing and you're coming in low and you think they're so desperate that they have to sign the contract back accepted. In this particular case, the vendor doesn't care, isn't motivated to sell, will sit on the house forever or rent it out. And this is something that the purchaser's agent probably should have been aware of before it put the purchaser in a situation where they have their house sold in another province and they have nowhere to live, and the house they want to move to, they don't want to sell it to them.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that the buyer's agent didn't present perhaps. When I break this down, there's a little bit of education that I feel the buyer's agent could have done with the buyer. I'm not sure where the buyer, if they made this conclusion on their own about the percentage that properties were going under list price, but it just really seemed like an opportunity for education, better communication between the buyer and the buyer's agent, therefore better communication between the buyer's agent and the listing agent, which wouldn't have put the seller in a position where they just felt like they were talking to the wall. Nobody was listening to, here's our position. Whether we're highly motivated or not, we're not interested in these offers. And if you keep firing them at me, which is forcing me to have to sign rejections and inconvenience at my time, I felt I was speaking loud and clear. It does. It just puts a negative tone. And unfortunately, with as good of intentions that a buyer may have, you can see how this just ended up clouding or muddying up the water, and therefore probably a high chance that that buyer, with all their tactics, that whether they have an agent maybe in their hometown speaking through their ear, because I've had this happen, Michael, many years ago, where I had buyers, I was on both sides, and the husband's sister-in-law was an ex-realtor in their province, and they felt that, I'm going to get you this property. Don't tell the realtor what I'm saying, but you need to do this, you need to do that. It really did upset that seller. They paid pretty much full list price at the end of the day because of the antics that this agent that was advising the buyer to say. I was trying my best to educate as much as I could, being in a dual agency situation, but I didn't realize what I was up against until the buyer's husband came into my office one day and almost in tears because he wanted this house so bad and he regretted listening to an ex-realtor.
Well, they're an ex-realtor for a reason, and they're probably in a market that has absolutely nothing to do with Prince Edward Island or Atlantic Canada. In this particular case, with this purchaser, they were using a brand new agent, and the brand new agent was allowing them to run the show 100% with absolutely no input or feedback or any communication with the listing agent, which in turn would have talked to the home seller, kicked a few things around. At this point, we're now collaborative because we basically told the purchaser to go away, which in turn just give us more leverage because we don't care if we sell the house. But now we're at a point where we'll probably end up putting this together. And we probably could have done this months ago if there's some communication happening. And when I talk about communication, I'm talking about communication on the phone. We're not playing instant messenger here because we're adults. No, these younger people now, if you phone them on the phone and actually have a voice conversation, they almost freak out because they don't know what to do because they're not used to having a phone call.
Yeah, it's a different time when you have the younger generations trying to conduct sales business. And sales, when you get to the root of it all, the old-fashioned traditional way of, face-to-face or a phone call is still to this day the best way of facilitating and trying to put a transaction together.
Absolutely. Let's get into Comedy Corner. This is more of an observation that Patty and I have had more than anything, but it's something you can look for. When your children leave home, when they're at home, the TV's going, they're not home, the fan's going, the heat's cranked up to 104 degrees, they have 5.5-hour showers. Money is no object, right? Leave the oven on all day, forget to turn it off. One thing I've noticed is once they leave home, you go to their apartment, or if they're fortunate to buy a house, it's like someone shut the electricity off and the heat is at 1. And you've run across this recently. One of your family members moving out into her first house. Congratulations. And she's running her heat at a balmy, 10 degrees Celsius?
Well, it wasn't quite 10.
8?
It was about 12 to 14 degrees, which was still too cold, especially when the temperatures were dipping down to the -20 mark. But it is, you're absolutely truthful, Michael, when you say the awareness now is there because they see how much the electricity bills are. They see how much the heat bills are. They're aware that these old appliances perhaps are just power-sucking machines. And now it's like, I'm not going to stand there with the fridge open so that the motor's running continuously because I can just see my electrical meter going up and the bill at the end of the month. So don't use the stove. Don't go in and out of the fridge. Go in once. Keep the heat down. I'm going to unplug everything. I only need to use so much power. Their awareness, although it works against them because now you got to worry about freezing pipes and depending on the setup with the house and that they buy. But it is entertaining. But I guess it's not something as a parent you can make your children aware of it, but they don't feel it or own it until they have to experience it themselves.
Until it's coming out of their bank account.
100%. And then they speak to you like, you don't understand, you don't get it, I can't afford this. And it's like, are you kidding me?
You could when you're living with us and you left your fan on 24 hours a day when you're out for a week.
Yeah, I've been living this for how many decades or however long you've been a parent. Yeah, it's a little entertaining, to say the least.
Which ties us into the next subject. In January, it can get quite cold in PEI, certainly not as cold as some of the temperatures I've witnessed in the northern Yukon and northern Canada. But if you're running a house or mini home or even a cottage, you want to make sure that you're not going to freeze your pipes. So don't be turning the heat off unless those pipes are filled with refrigerant or antifreeze. And have a professional do that. Always hire a plumber. Do-it-yourself plumbing sometimes doesn't work, and you could end up with busted pipes if you don't do it properly. And make sure that if you are going to be a miser and you're moving into your own place, that don't turn the heat down so low or off if you're out for the day that you could encourage the pipes to freeze even in a modern home. Modern homes, you shut the heat off, and the pipes are in between the inside wall and the outside wall. Sometimes they're not insulated properly, so they're pulling their heat from the rooms. And if you shut your heat off during the day, you could end up with a catastrophic issue.
Yeah, and because the trend on the island has been to buy cottage properties because they are more affordable, because you can still get a decent cottage property if it's not on a year-round road. We have the infrastructure with lots of farmers and that do blow out laneways and that, as long as it's not fully treed in, because that's a whole other obstacle. They can't really blow through the trees necessarily without damaging them. But be aware of the infrastructure of the piping system within the home and whether or not it is properly insulated underneath. So we're assuming this is on like wood piers or some sort of system like that, or a mini home, or even you'll see these trailers that are what are those called, Michael? Like the back of a truck, the fifth wheeler, where they're converting those into houses and cottage properties.
It'd be just a fifth wheel or some sort of trailer.
A trailer of that sort. Because if they don't properly insulate the pipes underneath and you walk in naively, especially if you're closing in the late fall and you have full intentions on living there year round, if you don't take the time at that time to make sure all the systems are properly wrapped in that, with all good intentions, you may find yourself in a bad situation in the dead of winter.
Absolutely. Patty has a property for sale in downtown Charlottetown, and one of the agents that were showing it actually had a pretty good question. I'm not sure how you responded, Patty, but the question was, can this be ran as an Airbnb, which I never really thought about. I'm not in the Airbnb business, but I do know there's been a lot of contention against Airbnbs because, of course, the local hoteliers, motel owners that have put big bucks into these establishments conceivably are losing money because now everybody and their brother wants to rent out their house, townhouse, or a room on Airbnb. So the question is, can anything in PEI be rented out in the form of an Airbnb or some other form of daily or weekly rental that would be equivalent to Airbnb?
Well, and if I could just back it up just it was a couple questions. They had asked if it could be used as a rental. So then that led me to, so if you're a realtor listening to this and someone says, can it be used as a rental? You might be a little quick to jump and say, yeah, there shouldn't be any problems with that. I wasn't going to put myself out there because define rental. So I started to ask the questions, and it turned out it led us to Airbnb rentals, but that's not how the buyer's agent initially asked the question. So that was something that, again, be aware of how you ask your questions, or as a listing agent, make sure you're clear on what the question actually is, because I could have walked myself into something and then they would have said, you said that it could have been used, or the listing agent said it could have been used as rentals.
But in your defense, you answered the question properly and you were thinking monthly rental, which probably won't be an issue. You answered their question properly. You represent the home seller, so you didn't walk into anything. If they wanted to specifically know and be explicit, not implicit, about daily or weekly rentals, which are a completely different story, and they're looked upon completely different by CRA, Canada Revenue Agency, and the municipal government, in this case, Charlottetown or Summerside, it's a different situation. But she asked, could it be used as a rental? And you answered it correctly. Yes, it can. A monthly rental.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. It turned out it wasn't a monthly rental that she was looking at because she worded it, can it be used as for rentals? And I just asked further. I said, if you're referring to monthly rentals, yes. I said, could you please be more specific? And then it turned out it was actually an Airbnb.
So when you get into Airbnbs, regardless of where you are in Canada and probably the States, look up the municipal rules, the city rules for short-term rental licensing. Principal residence requirement. This is an important one in Charlottetown. It may affect your ability to rent out a room or more if you're actually living in the premises. Zoning and downtown specifics. Provincial licensing. This is something that a lot of people overlook. Whatever you're renting out on a daily or weekly basis, there may be provincial licensing requirements, and you may have to apply to the tourism establishments through Tourism PEI. You need to display your provincial registration number. There's a complete list here, but just don't think you're just going to open the doors, throw an ad on Kijiji and start renting it out daily or weekly. I know for a fact, I know who you're going to get a call from. You're going to get a call from Tourism PEI because they look for all these ads.
Yes, they absolutely, and they're on top of it. They must have some department that is always combing through and keeping on top of this.
I know I've had a number of clients I've sold properties to that have been contacted by Tourism PEI, and they're requesting compliance with the regulations. So look into that, other practical rules and compliance, capacity, and safety. Obviously, it's probably not going to be safe to rent one room out to 25 people.
Yeah.
Stack them in there like firewood.
Not a good situation.
Parking requirements, which is another question you had in the past, particularly with downtown, because a lot of establishments or houses downtown are limited to parking spots, and they also have to have residential parking permits, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's about it. Taxes and levies, that's something you can probably talk to your accountant about. and that covers Airbnbs.
Yeah, but also know, Michael, which is something that I try to make sure if I have a buyer who is looking to utilize a space as an Airbnb, which I know we've got into on previous episodes, that you are now with CRA walking an HST line where when you want to sell that property because you are now considered a commercial establishment and are competing with hotels, you have now put yourself in a situation or position that HST may end up becoming applicable on your property when you sell. And market value most places all across Canada and probably North America, it's hard enough to sell a property at market value. But if you've got market value plus HST over and above that applicable to the buyer, chances are you're not going to be unloading that property too quickly.
HST and PEI is about 15%. Now, there's something you can do to get around it. If you are buying a rental with the intention of renting it and you are an HST registrant, you may be able to not have to pay that HST through an input tax credit, ITC tax credit. You can talk to your accountant about that. But if you're buying a rental as a personal residence, chances are you're going to pay that 15% on top, just like if you're buying a car.
Yeah, so you have to speak to your accountant because we're not accountants and we're not allowed to give you accounting advice. But it is a question that you should put forth to an accountant before you enter into this. Their HST is paid, yes, in the form of an input tax credit, but it's called a joint election where you both jointly agree that the HST cloud, if you will, is passed from the current owners to the new owner. And because the end user has not presented themselves yet, HST will just be applicable when that new person goes to sell.
You should have your CPA with you wherever you are doing real estate. And this brings up another little interesting conversation with an instance I saw actually on YouTube. It happened in Toronto. Somebody bought a house for $450,000, which was not a nice house. It was a major renovation project, and they exceeded rebuilding 90% of it, which traversed them into being an actual renovator or commercial entity opposed to Joe homeowner. Borrowed $1 million or so from a family member, never documented the loan, never kept track of any of the receipts. Reportedly made $250,000 with no capital gains because they claimed it was their primary residence. Revenue Canada came back years later and sent them over a bill for $1.37 million, which was a combination of capital gains, income tax, fines, HST requirements, and it turned into a giant mess. It took them well over a year or so with a tax consultant to get that down to $337,000. So they still ended up losing almost $100,000 and had to go through this arduous task of dealing with CRA because, as you know, CRA requires you to report within 30 to 90 days, but when they report to you, it's usually 8, 9 months, 12 months, 2 years later.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good point because a lot of people think they're just going to pick up a flipper, do some work, they'll claim it as their primary resident, and then assume they're going to cash in on some great equity here. So they will find out, they will find you. So no games. Speak to a CPA, speak to your accountant, make sure you're clear.
And I think the other thing they said that they wanted to make sure they had a CPA advising them and not a bookkeeper. Because in this particular situation, they had a bookkeeper that told them everything was all right and it's okay and it's tax-free. But then when CRA looked at it and their new CPA, they said, no, your bookkeeper was incorrect. Not to say bookkeepers don't know as much as CPAs, but in this particular case, they didn't. So they were ill-advised, and it cost them a lot of money and 2 or 3 years of their life. Not to mention they had to go back to all the suppliers and the person that lent them the money and get all this stuff documented as well, because what CRA said is, no documents, too bad for you. Which kind of brings up another point. You know, most people think you should keep your records for 6 years. This tells you that you kind of want to keep your records for a lot longer because they may actually go back to invoices and documents that precede or before that 6 years, which you may have tossed or shredded.
Yeah, a lot of, again, you should look at government regulations and their recommendations will say a minimum of 5 years, minimum 6, minimum 7. So be mindful of that. And before you destroy documents pertaining to this, pertaining even to bankruptcy papers and that, the government can come back after you. At the very least, keep a scanned copy of everything so that you're able to pull it if need be. Have some sort of cloud system. I know Michael uses as well as I do. I like Dropbox to make sure that I have all my documents all properly stored away in the cloud. So if I ever do have to draw on them, I will be able to produce them and I haven't put myself in a bad situation.
We received an email this week, and this is very common, people asking about if there's a natural gas hookup to the site, and the fact is there is no natural gas in PEI. Natural gas is only used and almost exclusively used and tanked into commercial operations such as Cavendish Farms and places like that. But we do not have piped-in natural gas, which is something you're going to find in areas like Toronto. What we do have is we have propane tanks that you usually rent on a yearly basis for around $100 for your typical tank. And we also have the main heating source, which is oil-fired boilers. People are now traversing over to heat pumps with some sort of backup system, which would usually be a propane fireplace in the event that your heat pump doesn't work or you need a bit of a boost, because heat pumps really weren't invented to operate at 40 below zero temperatures. And of course, we have electric heat, which can be expensive, radiators, radiant heat, and floor heat, which could be oil, or I should say water, or electrical. And we have on-demand water systems, which could be propane or electric fired. And I mentioned heat pumps. Anything else as far as heating your house? Or I guess you could use a wood stove and put the next 60 years of wood supply out in the front lawn.
Yes, no, I know. And people do use wood pellet stoves and that. From an insurance standpoint, they like to see you have 2 heat sources for your home, just in case the power goes out.
Well, of course, you can heat with wood pellets, but it's not very common, and it can be a major fire hazard. I had one client that was heating their house with sawdust, and they had the sawdust stacked up to the ceiling in the basement, which is basically creating a bomb. And the insurance company freaked when they saw this.
Well, that's not good. But I will point out, too, though, wood pellet stoves do require electricity.
Yeah, for the motors and all that sort of
Correct.
stuff.
So
the little tumblers inside, plus the fans or whatever they're using, where they're heating water or air.
Yeah, so the propane fireplace would be the best source where you're not having to draw electricity through.
We're going to shut her down here, Patty, because you always want them to want more. Plus, I know you want to get to bed and try to get better for the work week, so I'll let you close her down.
Thanks again for listening to another episode of the Michael and Patty Show, otherwise known as MAPS, PEI's podcast that helps guide you through the buying and selling and everything Prince Edward Island. We appreciate each and every one of you, and hopefully listening to my little bit crackly voice today wasn't too painful. But until next time, have a great day.
Thanks very much, Patty. Get well soon. We'll talk to everybody down the road. Be sure to follow, thumbs up, do whatever you need to do with the podcast. Have a great day, and hopefully we'll see you next week.